Today, as we celebrate the National Indigenous Day of Prayer, we are learning about and fully appreciating the deep, sustained, and sacred connections to the land that are at the heart of the lives of all Indigenous peoples. The story of the St. Peter's surrender is the story of my grandmother's family and people, about how much they lost, and yet how their deep connection could not really be severed. My grandmother, Mary Ann Hall, was born at the St. Peter's Reserve in Manitoba in 1880. St. Peter's was home to Saulteaux and Cree people on the banks of Cook's Creek near the Red River. At the same time, the nearby town of Selkirk was expanding, and there began to be pressure on the St. Peter's community to sell off their land. In September 1907, the St. Peter's Reserve was surrendered back to the Manitoba government. St. Peter's residents did technically vote on the surrender, but the vote was intentionally confusing with almost no notice, and the proceedings were exclusively in English, despite many residents not speaking that language. By 1910, it was reported in the local paper that the Indians of St. Peter's Reserve believed they were the victims of the white man's cunning and cupidity in the recent surrender of their lands. It was debated in the House of Commons, with the local MP saying that the land should not have passed into the hands of speculators and friends of government, and calling the surrender a barefaced swindle. The local Methodist minister was considered to be one of the swindlers. Many of the St. Peter's community went on to establish a new reserve, the Peguis First Nation on the Fisher River. Some, like my grandmother, lost most of their connections to St. Peter's. In 1911, the Manitoba government appointed a royal commission to look into the St. Peter's surrender. It determined that the surrender was not valid, illegal. But nothing was done to rectify that situation or provide redress, and the community remained dispersed, alienated, and lost to one another. But the Peguis First Nation continued to press for justice. In 1998, Canada confirmed it agreed that the 1907 surrender of the St. Peter's Reserve was void and legally invalid. In 2009, over 100 years after the surrender, the Peguis First Nation surrender claim received $126 million. Negan Sinclair, the son of Murray Sinclair, has spoken about the surrender, as his ancestors were also from St. Peter's. He says that the Indians at St. Peter's were prospering and might have been seen as a threat. He says the removal of the Indians was a kind of ethnic cleansing, and asks us to acknowledge that this is the history that made the town of Selkirk what it is today. A book about the St. Peter's surrender was written some time ago. It's called Shall We Gather at the River? It tells how the people at the time of the surrender said that they had left their faces at the river. When I think of the hymn, Shall We Gather at the River, I see it as a kind of honor song for my grandmother and all my relations who felt that they had left their faces at that river, but whose resilience, perseverance, and faith have meant they ultimately prevailed.